Hello student, welcome you to Mohan Sir classes. In this video lecture, we are going to learn about your history subject. The first lesson of the history is the dawn of modern culture in Europe and India. First lesson of your history is the dawn of modern culture in Europe and India. That is the early modern age from the year of 1300 to 1800 CE. So in this video class we will learn part 1. Let's begin the class. Let's read first paragraph. In this chapter we shall learn about many countries beside India. In this chapter we will learn many countries beside India. Let's first recall what you have learned about different countries. We have learned about different countries in class 7. Listen carefully. In class 7 we have learned about different countries. We learned that European continent is located to the north of west of India. Listen carefully. European continent is located to the northwest of India. So where is European continent is located? It is northwest of India. You already know a few important countries in Europe. Hope all of you know some few important countries in Europe. Our first topic is the modern age and before. The modern age and before. Let's begin the paragraph. Historians also debate issues like what are the special features of the modern age. That means many of the historians they argue and they debate the questions like what are the modern features what are the special features of modern age? What are the special features of the modern age? Just like you did in class, sometimes we ask or we argue, we discuss many kinds of questions, many doubt and many query. Seems like that historian they debate and they argue about what? What are the special features of modern age? It is widely accepted that two main features that distinguish modern age and early eras. Listen carefully. It is widely accepted that there are two main features. There are two main features that distinguish or differentiate between the modern age and the earlier eras. So what are these the two distinguished features? Those are industrial production and democratic governments. Industrial production and democratic governments. These two features distinguish or differentiate between the modern age from the early eras. Listen, in this paragraph we learn that historians always ask questions about what are the special features of modern age. As we asked in the class, seems like the historian also debate and argue about the question what are the special features of the modern age. And it is widely accepted that there are two main features that distinguish modern age from the earlier eras. What are the two main features? Those are industrial production and democratic government. Next paragraph. It is more difficult to pinpoint the social and cultural changes that have taken place in the modern age, but you can still make some general observation. Listen carefully. It is difficult to pinpoint. It is difficult to pinpoint the social and cultural changes. That means it is difficult to identify or point that what are the social and cultural changes have taken place during the modern age. During the modern age. But we can still make some general observation. That means it is difficult to find out what are the cultural and social changes took place in the modern age, but there are few things we can identify. Listen carefully. We give less importance to person's caste background now. Everyone is treated equally before the law, and the gap between the rich and poor is wider now than it was before. So what does this sentence that? We can give less importance to person caste and background now. Nowadays we don't have that much of like a untouchability, caste system, etc. Though it is there, though it is exist, even then what happened? We give less importance for this caste background nowadays. Next thing, that everyone is treated equally before the law. At present, everyone is treated equally before the law, and there is no gap between the rich and poor. There is no difference or too much gap between rich and poor as it was before. That means as compared to the earlier era, now what happened? We are giving less importance for the caste background. We are treating everyone equal before the law, and there is no gap between rich and poor. Next sentence, in earlier times, religion played a bigger role in people's lives. Earlier time what happened? What played? Religion played a bigger role in people's lives. They were more influenced by their religious belief. That means earlier people used to influenced by their religious beliefs. Today people have more faith in science and reason, but at present what happened? People having more faith on science and reason. So in this paragraph what you learn, that means it is difficult to identify that what are the social and cultural changes took place during the modern age, but still we can find out some general observation. How? Because at present we give less importance for the caste system, and everyone is treated equally before the law, and there is no too much gap between rich and poor at the modern age. But there was something different in the earlier eras. Next, in the earlier times, religion was playing a bigger role in the people's lives. That means people were influenced by the religious beliefs. But if you talk about the present context, people they have more faith in science and reason in compared to religion beliefs. Next paragraph. In this chapter we shall trace how and when the society of Middle Ages moved into the modern era. Listen carefully. In this chapter what we will trace? We will trace that how and when the society of Middle Age moved into the modern era. That means in this chapter we are going to talk and discuss about how the society of Middle Age moved to the modern era. The age when this process began is called Early-Modern Era. That means when we move from Middle Age to the modern era, this process is called what? Early-Modern Era. Listen carefully. In this chapter we are going to discuss that when and how Middle Age moved to modern era, and the process of this moving from Middle Age to modern era is called what? Early-Modern Era. Next paragraph. The process of change in Asia and Europe began sometimes from the 14th century, that means after 1300 CE. What is CE? Common Era, and continued till 1750 CE. Listen, the process of change in Asia and Europe, it began when? In the 14th century, that means 1300 CE or Common Era, and it continued till 1715 CE or 1750 CE. So what does this sentence says? That the process of change in Asia and Europe began in the 14th century and it was continued till 1750 CE. Religion, politics, art, commerce and trade saw many changes during these 450 years. Listen carefully. Religion, politics, art, commerce and trade saw many changes during these 450 years. That means there was many changes during these 450 years about religion, politics, art and commerce. Next sentence. More and more people began to live in cities and they also began to think differently. So during this modern era or early modern era, what happened? More and more people began to live in city and they also began to think differently. That means people start living in city and they start thinking differently. This pre-modern age laid the ground for the Industrial Revolution after the French Revolution. That means what? This pre-modern age laid ground for Industrial Revolution after the Revolution. That means because of this pre-modern age, there was what? Establishment of the Industrial Revolution after the French Revolution. So, in this paragraph, we learn that there was a lot of changes in Asia and Europe from the 14th century, and it was still continued until 17th, 15th century. And we can see many changes in religion, politics, art, commerce, and trade. Next, more number of people they began to live in cities, and they began thinking differently. And this pre-modern age laid the ground for the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution. Next paragraph. What development took place in the Asian countries like India, Iraq and Turkey, and European countries like Italy, Holland, France, England between 14th and 18th century? So in this paragraph it is said that what are the development took place in the countries like in the Asian countries. So what are the Asian countries like in India, Iraq, Iran, Turkey. So what are the development took place in the Asian country, and what are the development took place in the European countries like Italy, Holland, France, England between the 14th and 18th century that led the economic and political revolution. So in this paragraph, what we are learning that during this 14th to 18th century, what are the changes took place countries like Asian countries like India, Iraq, Iran and Turkey, and European countries like Italy, Holland, France and England. That led for what? Economic and political revolution. Next sentence, the changes were many, but we shall discuss only the cultural, religious and intellectual changes that took place. So if you talk about the changes in the Asian and the European countries during 14th to 18th century that led for the economic and political revolution, there are many changes. But we are mainly going to discuss about cultural, religious and intellectual changes. Next paragraph. Three important processes occurred between 14th and 18th century. Listen carefully. There were three important processes occurred during 14th to 18th century. So what were the three important processes? The first one was the Renaissance, second the Reformation, and the third the Enlightenment. So these were the three important processes occurred during 14th to 18th century. What were that? Renaissance, Reformation and Enlightenment. Next sentence. These movements are associated with European history, but similar developments took place in the Asian countries during this period. So when we talk about this Renaissance, Reformation, Enlightenment, so these are associated or related to European history. They are related to European history. But what happened? Similarly, development took place in the Asian countries also. It also took place in Asian country. For example, in India, we had the Bhakti and Sufi movements and the new awakening in art that happened during this time. So if you talk about this 14th to 18th century in India, what happened? There we have development of Bhakti and Sufi movement, and the new awakening in the art that happened during this time. That means during this time there was development of the Bhakti movement, Sufi movement, and also what, a new awakening in the art that happened during this time. In fact, Asia and Africa contributed significantly many of the changes that occurred in Europe. That means Asia and Africa also they contributed significantly the changes occurred in Europe. That's why since the past few decades historians have been saying that we must study the changes not just in the European context but on a global scale. Because of that reason, many of the historians they says that means we have to study the changes not in the European context, not only in the European context but also on a global scale. So in this paragraph what we learn that there were three important processes occurred during the 14th to 18th century, and those are the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment. And these three movements were associated with European history, but also it has similar development took place in the Asian country also. How? In India, during those days, Bhakti movement and Sufi movement developed. The new awakening of art happened during this time. Next sentence says thus, in fact, Asia and Africa contributed significantly of the many changes occurred in the Europe. That is the reason many historians says that we must study the changes not just in the context of Europe but in a global scale. Next topic, the different phases of changes. The different phases of changes. What exactly happened 1370-50 CE? That means during the time period of 1300 to 1750 CE, what actually happened? Let's find out how the modern era began. So from the following paragraph, we are going to find out actually how the modern era began. First topic, trade and urbanization. During this period, trade expanded rapidly between Europe, North Africa, and Asia. During which period? 1300 to 1750 CE. What happened? There was a expand of what? Expand of trade. Where? In Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Commerce expanded within the countries as well, with different kinds of goods being traded. That means within the or inside the country itself, there were different kinds of goods being traded or different kinds of business took place. Listen carefully. During this period, trade expand or business increased rapidly or firstly where in Europe, North Africa, and Asia. In same time, what happened? This commerce and business also expand within the countries as well or inside the country. How? Different kinds of goods were being traded or being purchased within the country itself. Next sentence, new cities were born and older cities expanded. So during this time period, that means during this time period, what happened? New cities were born or new cities were established and the old cities were expanded or become big and it enlarged. This urbanization brought with many changes. Because of this urbanization, there were many changes. What is urbanization? Urbanization is in the sense is that increasing of cities and countries, town and business. That is called what? Urbanization. So when there was urbanization, there were many changes. A new class of wealthy merchants emerged. That means Because of the urbanization, what happened? A new class of wealthy merchant emerged. What is merchants? That means a new types of what? A wealthy, a rich businessman. Merchant in the sense businessmen developed during this period. People traveled more between cities, leading to an exchange and spread of new ideas, invention and technologies. What happened? People traveled from one place to other place, one country to other country, one city to other city. For what? To exchange and spread new ideas. That means they used to share their ideas to others and they used to receive new ideas and invention and technologies. So, in this point, what you learn? That means during this period, which period? 1300 to 750, there was the trade expand rapidly in Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Next, commerce and trade also what expand within the countries. That means different kinds of things were purchased and sold. The growth of trade also grow. Sorry. So the growth of cities in three continents. Because of the trade, what happened? There was a development of cities in three continents. Which are the three continents? Europe, North Africa, and Asia. And what happened? New cities were established, and those old cities were become what? Large and big. And because of the urbanization, what happened? There were many changes. And because of the changes, what happened? There were many rich businessmen were emerged or came up within the society, and those people traveled from one country to other country, one city to other city for exchanging knowledge, ideas, invention and technology. Next paragraph. There was one striking difference between the cities of India and Europe. So when we talk about the cities of India and Europe, there was a striking difference. There was a striking difference. What are that? Many of the cities in Europe were not ruled by king. So in those days, many of the cities in Europe were not ruled by the kings. They were independent and autonomous. Those cities were independent and autonomous and governed by organizations formed by merchants and artisans. And those countries, which countries? European countries, the cities and towns were ruled by the independent and autonomous people. That means who? Governed by organization formed by whom? Either merchants or artisans. That means those cities were ruled by either a organization of merchants or artisan. So, to some extent, democratic republican idea began to take root in these cities. So, what happened? Somehow or anyhow, republic ideas began to take root in these cities. Which cities? The European cities. The cities included Geneva, Florence in Italy, Flanders in Holland, etc. So, which are the major cities? The cities like Geneva, Florence in Italy, and Flanders in Holland. These are the cities. Big cities like Surat, Agra, and Vijayanagar was developed in India at this time. So, while in European country like Geneva, Florence, and Flanders, these cities were developed in same like in India, like Surat, Agra, and Vijayanagar. Such kinds of cities were developed in India. But what happened? But they were still under the rule of kings or the control of feudatory lords. But still these cities, which cities? Surat, Agra, Vijayanagar, they were under the control of king or the feudal lords. So in this paragraph we learn that there was a striking difference between the cities of India and Europe. What happened? The next sentence says that many cities of Europe were not ruled by kings. They were independent and autonomous. They were ruled by either an organization of merchants or an organization of artisans. So we can say that somehow the democratic republican idea began to take root in these cities. So if you take the example of those cities where like Geneva, Florence, and Flanders in Holland. These are the major cities of European country. But if we talk about India, big cities like Surat, Agra, Vijayanagar, all these cities developed in India, but these cities were still under the control of king or the feudal lords. Next, centralized states. Centralized states. This was the time when many powerful kingdoms were established. That means during this time what happened? Many powerful kingdoms were established. For example, in India, we had Vijayanagar Empire and Mughal dynasty. During this period, which period? 1300 to 1750 CE, what happened? Many powerful kingdoms were established, and in India we can take the example of Vijayanagar Empire and Mughal dynasty. Iran had Safid Empire and Turkey the Ottomans. If you talk about Iran, they were having what? Safvid Empire, and in Turkey they were having what? Ottomans Empire. Many strong kingdoms were established in France, Spain, England as well, apart from several smaller kingdoms in Italy. That means during this period in European countries like France, Spain and England, there many strong kingdoms were established, and also what? There were some several small kingdoms in Italy. So what we learn from this paragraph? That means during this time many powerful kingdoms were established. For example, in India, there were like a Vijayanagar Empire and Mughal dynasty was established. In Iran, what happened? Safvid Empire, and in Turkey, the Ottomans Empire were established. And if we talk about that, this in European country, there also many strong kingdoms were established in France, Spain and England. In same time, there were also several smaller kingdoms were established in Italy. Next paragraph. These kings were all very ambitious, so they kept tight control on their power of their kingdoms. What happened? These kings, whose kings? Above discussed kingdoms, they were very ambitious. So what happened? They kept a tight control their power over their kingdoms. That means they strictly ruled their kingdoms. As a result, power, health and authority gradually began to get concentrated in their hands. Because of this reason, as they become very strict and ambitious, what happened? The power, wealth and authority gradually began to get concentrated in their hands. That means they rule completely. We call these kingdoms centralized kingdoms. Listen carefully. These kingdoms will call what? Centralized kingdoms. Listen carefully. There were many ambitious kings. They kept a tight control over their kingdoms. Because of that reason, what happened? Power, wealth and authority gradually began to concentrate on the hands of the kings or feudal lords. So these kinds of kingdoms we call what? Centralized kingdoms. What we call? Centralized kingdoms. Because economic and political power was centralized in the king. Why it is called centralized kingdom? Because economic and political power was centralized in the king. Before this time, jamindars, that means landlords and feudal lords, used to rule over their lands and estates govern their subject. That means before the kings and the dynasty, who used to rule? Jamindars and feudal lords. They used to rule the kingdom and the states. Now their powers were curtailed or completely taken over. But now what happened? Their powers are completely taken away or taken over by the kings. So in this paragraph we learn that there were many ambitious kings, those who did tight control over their kingdoms. Because of that reason, power, wealth, authority gradually began to concentrate in the hands of the king, and all these kingdoms were called what? Centralized kingdoms. Why? Because the economic and political power was centralized in the king. Before these kings, what happened? Jamindars and feudal lords were used to rule the lands and state. but now all the powers were taken over by the king. Next topic, the emergence of an urban middle class. The emergence of an urban middle class. The expansion of trade, the growth of cities, and centralization of all authority under the king led to one important change. We learned that there was expansion of the trade, growth of the cities, and centralization of authority under the king led to an important change. What was the important change? The emergence of a new middle class in the countries. Because of these three things, what happened? There was a new change. That means a new middle class people developed in the countries. Listen carefully. Because of the expansion of trade, growth of cities and towns, and centralization of authority under the king led to an important change. What was that? Emergence or establishment of a new middle class in the countries. It consists of merchants, rich artisans, accountants, clerks, lawyers, professional artists, poets, writers, and so on. That means the new middle class, those who emerged or developed in the society, who were they? They were merchants, rich artisans, accountants, clerks, lawyers, professional artists, poets, and writer, and some others. Next, urbanization and development also saw there new kinds of jobs being created. That means because of the urbanization and development, new kinds of jobs were created. For example, bookkeeping, accountancy, administration, tax collection, judicial, legal work, diplomatic contacts between kingdoms, etc. So, because of the development of the because of the urbanization and development, new kinds of jobs were created. So, what were the new kinds of jobs were being created? Like bookkeeping, accountancy, administration, tax collection, judicial, legal work, diplomatic contract between the kingdoms. Such kinds of jobs were created in the middle class. The people doing these jobs became part of the middle class. That means the people, those who are doing these kinds of job, they are become the part of the middle class. This class was always trying to earn more money and hence prepared to go to distant kingdoms in search of good jobs. That means this class, which class? This middle class, always trying to earn more money, and because of that reason they used to go to a distant kingdom in search of good job. So there was constant movement of people across a large geographical areas. Because of that reason, what happened? There was what? A movement, a traveling people from one place to other, one country to other country. So in this topic, what topic? The emergence of an urban middle class. We learn that because of the expansion of trade, growth of city, and centralization of power, and new or important changes took place in the society. That means that was an emergence of new middle class in the country. And who were the middle class, or which are the people those who developed as a middle class? They were like merchants, rich artisans, accountants, clerks, lawyers, professional artists, poets, writers, and so on. What happened? Urbanization and development also what? So a new kinds of job. What are that? People get the job like a bookkeeping, accountancy, administration, tax collection, judicial, legal work, diplomatic contract between kingdoms. Such kinds of new jobs were emerged. Next, those who did these kinds of job, they become the part of middle class. And this class people, they're trying to earn more money. So what happened? They prepare to go to different or distant kingdom in search of good job. And so there was a constant movement or traveling of people from one place to other place. Next paragraph. This wide exposure made the middle class look at everything happening around them with a more critical eye. People were not afraid of criticizing their religious leaders for their rules. So, what happened? This wide exposure made the middle class to look at everything happening around them with a more critical eye. As people travel from one place to other place, they exchange the ideas, etc. So, what happened? The people start looking around them more critically. The people were not afraid of criticizing religious leader or their rulers. Now what happened? People were not afraid to criticize their religious leader or their rulers. Education played a big role in shaping them. So because of this what happened? Education play an important role. To be educated was not just becoming literate. During those days, that means to be educated or educated in the sense not only become just a literate. People needed to have a wide grasp of literal knowledge to perform their jobs well. That means during those days only to be educated was not just becoming literate, but what people needed to have a wide grasp literacy knowledge. That means they need to have a sound knowledge to perform their job or to do their duty. So in this paragraph what you learn that means because of this wide express, the middle class look everything around them with a critical eye view. People were not afraid of criticizing their religious leaders and their rulers. And for this one, education play an vital or important role. And during those days or those time, to be educated means not only a mere normal education, but what happened? People had to know a sound knowledge about the literal thing. Then only they could perform their job well or they can do their duty properly. Next paragraph. In Europe, education means studying Greek and Latin classic. Listen carefully. In Europe, education meant what is that? Studying Greek and Latin classic. In India, studying means what? It means that Persian and Sanskrit classic. Listen carefully. In Europe, education means studying of Greek and Latin classic, but in India, studying means what? Studying of Persia and Sanskrit classic. But there was also wide exchange of knowledge. In Central what happened? There was wide exchange of knowledge. The Greek text of Aristotle and Plato, of Indian classical such as the Panchatantra, mathematical treatise were translated into different languages and widely read. So what happened? We know that the Greek text of Aristotle and Plato and Indian classic such as the Panchatantra, mathematical treatise, all these things were translated into different languages. During the reign of Mughal in India, many Sanskrit classics such as Ramayana, Mahabharata, Upanishad were translated into Arabic and Persian. That means if we talk about during the Mughal empires, there were many Sanskrit classics which were like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Upanishads. They were translated into Arabic and Persian languages. So from this paragraph we learn that in Europe education meant what? Studying of Greek and Latin language, Latin classic. In India studying means what? Studying of Persian and Sanskrit classic. But there was a wide exchange of knowledge. The Greek textbook of Aristotle and Plato and Indian classics such as Panchatantra, mathematical treatise, all things were translated into different languages widely. And during the reign of Mughal Empire, many Sanskrit classics such as Ramayana, Mahabharata, Upanishad translated into Arabic and Persian language. Next paragraph. Though there were many similarities between the middle class in Europe and India, some important difference needed to be noted. That means there were some similarity between the middle class of Europe and India. In same time, there were also some difference to be noted. First, this class in India was limited to few specific caste group. What happened? First of all, this class in India, which class? Middle class. They were specific caste group. For example, Kayastha, Kshatriya and Brahmin. These were the three middle class people in India. In Europe, people from different occupational groups were included into this class. But when you talk about Europe, different occupational or different job or working peoples were included into this middle class. The second significant difference was that middle class in India showed no special interest in science and mathematics. If you want to see the second significant difference, the middle class of India, they did not have any interest in science and mathematics, but the people of Europe, they were having what? A sound knowledge about that. Understood? So what you learn from this paragraph? There were many similarity between the middle class of Europe and middle class of India, but also what? There were some difference between middle class of Europe and middle class of India. So the first one is that in the middle class of India, there were somewhat limited or a few caste groups were working in the middle class of India. Who were there? Kayastha, Kshatriya and Brahmin. But if we talk about Europe, different occupational or working people were included into this middle class. And what is the second thing that? Second thing is that the middle class of Europe as a Indian, they were not having interest in studying of science and mathematics, but the middle class of the Europe, they were very good in mathematics and science and they were very keen to learn all these things.